accessibility in your job? A little bit. It's kind of like the redheaded stepchild, but it is actually super important, and it's not super hard to bring accessibility into your website. Um, I've worked in a lot of different code bases for different employers, and a lot of times I get in there and I see all these divs, div, 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 and I'm just like, why? Why are we doing this? Because it's so easy to make things accessible. Why does it matter? Well, okay, hang on. There we go. Imagine visiting a website that you cannot use. Buttons are impossible to click, text is unreadable, you can't find what you need. This is a reality for millions of people who have disabilities. And if you want an everyday example, go to any recipe on your phone that's on like Eater or any of those websites, and it's really hard to see that little button at the top that says scroll to recipe. But that's what it's like for people with disabilities who are using keyboard navigation and screen readers. It can be a nightmare. Over 1 billion people, 15% of the world's population live with some form of disability. It's a significant part of our user base that we may be unintentionally excluding. The big picture is it's not just a moral obligation. It's about creating equal access and opportunity for all. Plus, making your website accessible leads to better user experiences and better SEO, which I cover here. Accessible websites improve SEO, broaden audience reach, and enhance usability for every user, regardless of their abilities or the context. So let's talk about semantic HTML, because semantic HTML is the foundation of accessibility. Semantics lays out rules for how HTML gets interpreted by the browsers, and they govern the structure and meaning. So a lot of times I'll see websites where people use semantic HTML for formatting. Like, well, I'm just going to put an H1 every single place that I need a large font. That is not what semantic HTML is for. Early versions had heading elements like H1, H2, but not the structural elements that we have today, like header, main, and footer. Each of these elements gives structure to the document, the web page. Creating semantic code means picking the right element for the job, giving your page structure, and it's important for screen readers because they use those tags to determine the hierarchy of the web page. When you select the right element for the content, you get some things for free, as in the web platform gives it to you without any other effort, like formatting. Like if you do decide to use H1s and H2s for their font size, I don't recommend that, but you do get some benefits from that because an H1 is going to be the largest thing on the page generally. And then structure and meaning get conveyed to browsers and assistive technologies, and some elements come with built-in keyboard functionality like form elements. So how does accessibility, or how do semantic HTML work? The body element of an HTML document contains the main content of the page. Content inside that, if you don't have it formatted, like if you just had a website that had like a body, a bunch of text, and a body closing tag, you would see that on your screen, but it's going to look like this. It's just going to be unformatted, just sentences running into each other, and it's hard to read. So we can separate those elements inside the body with divs. And so if we do that, we get a little bit better formatting where we see a study of butterflies. Butterflies are little bugs with cute wings. Butterfly habitats, they live in flower houses and hang out at dang coffee shops. But it's still not like making any sense because it's all divs. Divs have no semantic value at all. Like when you use a div tag on something, that has zero semantic value in the body of your web page. So we can format this with H1s and a P tag and an H2 for the second heading, which is like the subheading, and another P tag. And then we get this, a study of butterflies. So that H1 at the top is the heading, the main heading of the page. Screen readers will look for that and they'll say, this is the main section. And then it takes in the P tag under that. And then the butterfly habitats is an H2, which is the second heading. You know, we have 3, 4, 5, and 6. Those are all hierarchy determined. You only want one H1 on your page. The other subheadings, you can definitely use more than once. Some non-accessibility benefits of semantic HTML. It's standard-based and stable and shouldn't change across future generations of browsers. Unlike, I mean, HTML does change at some times, but the standards that are set down by W3 for semantic HTML have remained pretty static since it was brought into existence. Search engines can index the content on your website so that it ranks well enough that users can find it. I don't know, like if you ever make a sitemap for your website, or you know, if you want web crawlers to crawl your page, search engines have a much better time. Google will actually ding you for not using semantic HTML. If you ever run a lighthouse on your page and your page is all divs, Google's going to be like, you can't, you know, your SEO is terrible and accessibility is terrible. You'll get poor ranks on that. And that affects how your web page is rated in their search engine hierarchy. RSS readers can parse and style the elements appropriately. Screen readers and other assistive technologies can communicate elements properly to the user. One side note on that, I don't know if you guys saw, Kent Dodds had a post where he was having a screen reader read like Instagram pages where people use the graphic for their names or stuff like that, and it's a nightmare. You want to make sure like that your pages are accessible to as many people as possible. Cutesy styling is not the way to go. So using an HTML telephone input and an input tag, which input is a semantic tag, it gives users a telephone specific keypad on some mobile browsers. Not all of them will have it, but it also, you know, kind of changes the way that the input works. So what if we don't have a tag that works for us? I can't go over all the semantic tags and what they do. There are tons of resources out there. I have some links to the resources at the end of this. You can go to W3 Schools, you can go to W3's page, you can look at the different types of semantic tags, what they do and how they work. We can use ARIA. Not that ARIA. So what ARIA allows us to do, it stands for Accessible Rich Internet Applications. It's a specification from the W3C that basically allows developers to make non-semantic HTML more accessible to people with disabilities. Error messages are a good example. You might have an HTML for some reason because you're having difficulty. The HTML for the error might look like this. You've got a label for first name, you've got a span, enter your first name, and you've got an input type of text. And then like when the error is true, that error, enter your first name, span may come up. A sighted user can use that, can see the error on the screen because it'll be in red that says enter your first name. But a screen reader focusing on the input, they won't see that error because the error message isn't linked in any way to the input. So in that case, you can say the same label, the span ID is first name error, and then the input type in that box, you can say the ARIA described by first name error. So ARIA is going to look, it's going to find that description and it's going to say, oh, this is the error that goes along with it. So you can force ARIA accessibility onto an element that doesn't have it natively. And now the error message is announced when the input is in focus. So the screen reader will say like, hey, you didn't put your first, it'll literally say, enter your first name. why ARIA doesn't replace semantic HTML. ARIA attributes can be used to make unsemantic HTML more accessible to screen readers. For example, in this checkbox, let's say for some reason you're having trouble getting the checkbox looking the way you want. You're like, I'm just going to create a div and call it a checkbox. So I give it that role of checkbox, and then it looks like a checkbox. But in order to make this work like semantic HTML, we can do this. We can say the role is checkbox and ARIA checked is false, so that when the user loads the page, there's no check in it, and you're telling a screen reader or other accessibility devices that it's not checked yet. But it's still not enough to make it behave like a checkbox, because divs aren't focusable by keyboards, because divs have no semantic meaning. So we have to do this. We have to say the role is checkbox, ARIA checked is false, and the tab index is 0, which if you're using keyboard navigation, that will allow the user to tab to this checkbox. But even then, a real checkbox, when submitted as part of a form, will send its value. Because this isn't an actual checkbox, we have to submit its value. It won't submit its value. We have to use JavaScript to submit the value for this. And so then you're doing JavaScript to create functions for an element that you could literally just make an input and say type checkbox, and it does all the things that we need for accessibility. That's why the first rule of ARIA is not to use it. So, but you know, there are going to be times like I did a page recently where we had a bunch of drop downs in the page that were the way it was constructed. I had to use divs for that. And so I threw a bunch of ARIA stuff on there just to make it, you know, like ARIA open, ARIA closed, just to make that accessible for screen readers. Because here's the other thing is that your website, there are large companies. One of my coworkers, a website that he was developing with a team, I think it was for a church, large church. They got sued because their website wasn't accessible. There are standards for having your website be accessible. Obviously, if this is your portfolio, no one's going to care. No one's going to come at you for making that marketing web page not accessible. But you won't, your SEO will take a hit. It's just not a good look. So inclusive design is about providing the best possible experience to the most possible users by using accessible components. You get enhancement offered by some browsers and devices so that it makes your life easier, so you don't have to do all that JavaScript and stuff to make divs behave like accessible components. When semantic HTML alone isn't enough, you have ARIA, which can provide more context, but I wouldn't go crazy with the ARIA stuff. And then do the hard work, make things inclusive. It's a win for you. It's a win for the web. I will I'll share this to everyone, and I'll post in the meetup page the link to this. And then here's just some resources that I used. The Ally Project's website. So Ally is committed to accessible web. There's an article on understanding semantics, and there's from CSS Tricks why, how, and when to use semantic HTML and ARIA. And this is me. I'm a front-end software engineer at Schlotman Solutions. I have 5 years of experience, and I am currently working a contract, but open to W-2 employment. That's my link tree, and that is my dog Bailey. She's going to be 12 in a few months, and I've had her since she was 6 weeks old. Does anybody have any questions? Yep.
You called it Ally or Ally.
Yeah.
Tell us more about where that comes from.
So that comes from the Ally standards comes from, well, I don't know, is it Ally?
A11Y.
Yeah, A11Y. I know, but I just yeah, yeah. I mean, I was gonna say, like, I just usually refer to it as Ally.
Yeah.
They have a lot of standards for accessibility. I don't know how to go back. Oh yeah. So if you go to the ally project, the A11Y project.com, you can see it's a community driven effort to make digital accessibility easier. And they've got a lot of really amazing resources on learning about accessibility, how you can, there are plenty of websites out there that will do an accessibility audit for your website, including, but not limited to running a lighthouse on your website, which I would say Lighthouse is kind of a crappy accessibility audit. So you definitely want to go through a different channel to get your website audited. And then you can see like they have on their webpage. So it's a11yproject.com. They've got a bunch of really good articles, and they also are like a community project that helps promote standards for accessibility. Does that make sense? Okay. Anybody else? Yeah.
With like highly interactive content, like specifically in the carousel, kind of struggling or like how do you, I don't know if you have like specific technical level topic, but how do you deal with stuff that with the carousel? Things that have one.
So, right, because like for focus, it's difficult for screen readers to get. So I mean, a lot of times with components like that, I will opt to use, I don't construct my own. I'll use like a bootstrap carousel or let's see, React Aria components from Adobe. They have like those have like those accessibility stuff baked in. So instead of like trying to figure out how am I gonna provide focus on this thing and then unfocus it as it swipes off the screen, I personally take the easy way out on those and just use like, I mean, I haven't worked in a project in years where we were just using straight vanilla CSS. My current employer, we're using Bootstrap and compiled CSS. The last few jobs I've had have been Tailwind. But yeah, I mean, you can get like, we'll use things like React Aria components that are pre-made, and they have that built-in accessibility. So I'm sorry to like kind of like sideswipe or sidestep that, but I haven't really built a carousel from scratch in probably 4 years or 5 years. So
We use a glider JS, but they're like very, so we make it function, but we provide the service consistency on it
yeah,
because we have to be very JavaScript.
yeah.
Do you have tools you use for accessibility audits?
So we generally run it through, there are websites available for like accessibility.
Yeah, because you mentioned you don't like Lighthouse that much. Is it just because it doesn't do much for accessibility, or?
Yeah, I don't love it. It doesn't give you a lot of information. So like if you use, I think I've used this one before from, so if I do so this is a website that I'm working on for the client where I work right now. And it'll just go through and it'll give you like a lot of information about about the page. Yeah, it just gives you more information than Lighthouse. I mean, Lighthouse is great for, a quick and dirty kind of like, you can see a lot of like SEO stuff. But this will give you information about your website, what's inaccessible. And we are in the process of building this right now. This is the test website, so we're still working on. In fact, I got a feature ticket today for making this accessible. So at my work, I do most of the UX UI cleanup and then accessibility stuff. So
Is this a free tool?
this is a free tool, yeah. Access Scan is completely free. Yeah.
How profitable is it for an attorney to sue if you aren't putting in?
I mean, I guess that depends on, I don't know if you remember like 20 years ago, there were attorneys going around in Southern California suing employers for not being ADA compliant. on behalf of clients that didn't actually like exist. I mean, this page, this access scan page says, you know, it has right here language. It says mitigate legal risks. So there are companies that have gotten sued for having inaccessible websites. I don't know how profitable it is. I don't know how prevalent it is, but it does happen.
I actually see that quite a bit, where it's cheaper to pay out the suit than to fight it.
Right.
Even if it's bogus, so like I've reviewed a lot of their complaints, like line by line, sent to the client, like, hey, this is all bogus, like, here's what we've done for accessibility of the site. But they're like, it's gonna be more expensive for us to fight it.
Right.
It's a shock there, but they figure it's time to get one to roll.
It's awful.
Yeah, it really is terrible. The fact that they can sue people when they don't even have standing. The attorneys don't have standing, but they, you know, it's a gray area.
We have a question from Zoom.
Okay.
Do you have to run these accessibility scans on every page, or are there some that will go look at multiple pages on your site?
I have not found one that runs on the entire site. Probably some of the pay ones will, but this one here, you run it per the page. This is the conference page. This is not the home page. Yeah, I'm assuming the ones that would, I mean, I guess you could build a bot too that would do it, that would just plug in these websites and pull the reports. But no, the accessibility checkers that I use are free tier. So I haven't seen any of them that have, that will do like an entire website. I mean, Lighthouse won't even do that, will it? I don't think so. I think it just does the page that's loaded on the screen, so.
Even the pop-ups, that's the pop-ups.
Right, and like, that's another kind of accessibility nightmare is modals, which again, is why I prefer to use like a bootstrap modal or, you know, a modal that's constructed by someone else that has accessibility standards built into it.
But I want to drill into the carousel. So I have made a carousel like thing this year. It's basically just like a list of images or maybe something less than that. It's basically using CSS to manipulate where from the perspective of some alternative rendering, like a screen reader. You would probably just ignore the CSS and just go through the list.
Yeah. So that's what I was gonna say, like that would be, well, and it depends on where the carousel items are coming from. Like, if you have them all on the page and you're just like swapping out, then the screen reader may see like all of those. It won't be able to focus on one. That, right, but I mean, like, I left out that example, but that would have been one example back on one of the older slides in my presentation where in that one where I was showing like the formatting, the progress is you can make CSS, so you can have divs that have CSS classes that will replicate that view on that butterfly page. But screen readers aren't going to see that. They don't look at CSS classes. They only look at what is focusable on the page, and so like the semantic hierarchy and stuff like that.
All images have it out. And that-
Not they don't, people don't do that though. Like, I mean, I know like React will scream at you it'll like give you a warning in the console if you have an alt tag, if you have an image with no alt tag, but it won't forbid you from putting that image. You can totally use image elements without an alt tag, or
Say- Kind of weird.
yeah, sounds like a lot of work though.
Carousel case, it sounds like in the worst case, some users just get too much content, which seems better than the opposite. It's probably.
Well, I mean, kind of again, back to the example of the recipe page, like if you had to if you had to keyboard scroll all the way down that recipe page and like skipped over the button that says go to recipe, that's a nightmare. You are going through an absolute ton of content as you scroll down that page. So
Aria didn't, yes, for sure. Later, take that tag away or the attribute away, and then it becomes something with that unique. Yep.
Yeah, and you can also do the opposite. You can have an SR only tag in something that screen readers will read, but the user can't see. Yeah, and that's why I didn't do too deep of a dive, or I didn't do really any kind of deep dive into the specifics because there are so many semantic HTML tags and ways to use those. There's not enough time. So, anybody else?
What can you tell us about visual impairment? So people that are colorblind or they can't see very well, so they make it really big.
Oh, so like are you saying like having like a screen reader accessibility thing enabled for if you're visually impaired, but you're not using a screen reader?
Yeah,
Or
people that don't use a screen reader, but they have some impairment, like they can't see colors.
okay.
Is that part of this?
There is actually like a color blindness thing for inaccessibility, but I'm not super familiar with it. I know like a lot of what we do in Bootstrap in our current repo is like everything has like theming variables on it so that so like for things like dark mode, but also if someone has like some kind of like custom color set up on their application, our themes automatically provide the correct contrast on every page. Like they're paired together, like all the colors are mapped out for their accessibility in that they all their contrast is set to like you'll never have like a contrast error on one of our pages. But as far as like font sizes and stuff like that, I'm not super aware of that technology. I'm not really familiar with it, sorry.
No, that's helpful with the color. So it sounds like there's something that can tell you if there's enough contrast between your colors.
Yeah. There's like 4 different, there's a lot of like own plugins. They're not one great for you can switch to the different color blindness because like there's at least 4 different color blindnesses. If you're not colorblind, which hopefully you are, you look through the different types to see how terrible it is, it would be even better if you just once the night you just have to see it out.
Yeah. I mean, well, Lighthouse will give you will tell you when you have elements that don't have high enough contrast. So like if you have a button where you had like a gray text on a sort of light blue background where it's really hard to see, like if you run a Lighthouse test or if you test on here too, it's going to tell you like there's low contrast on these elements, so they're going to be difficult to read. And that's just for anyone. Yeah. Anybody else? Well, thanks, guys.